I'll let you know that I'm a pretty hardcore libertarian. I don't know how much you know about libertarianism and
Hmm.
the thought leaders, but like I'm a Ron Paul,
Hmm.
Scott Hortonite type libertarian. So I'm pretty I'm pretty open when it comes to social issues to what
Hmm.
people want to do with their life.
Right.
But when it comes to money, I think, that's everybody else's business. That's everybody's own business. And I'm a lot more fiscally, what's the word, extreme than most Republicans end up being. But I have seen some of the things that you have put that seems pretty interesting to that. So
Yeah, I've spoken with quite a few libertarians, and I'm gonna adjust my camera a little bit. And I think we are more aligned on that fiscal side. And quite frankly, here in Kansas, they'd probably support me if they don't have a candidate that they want to put out there for governor. And I don't think they do at this point. So, that's good for me. There's nobody else that they like. So, you know.
well, just a piece of advice. Something I know, like Mises is a pretty heavy influence right now in the Libertarian Party, and
Right.
currently their strategy is basically give us some concessions to what we want,
Hmm.
and we'll back you. That's how DeSantis ended up getting a lot of that backing
Right.
in Florida, because it was just basically like, hey, we appreciate what you did on COVID. You didn't
Right.
lock us down, so we'll give you this backing.
Right.
Or Trump, where he was, hey, we'll free Ross Ulbricht, and so that got a lot of concessions. It wasn't enough for me, the Ross Ulbricht, but it did get a lot of votes, I'm sure, from
Hmm.
libertarians from
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
from that game. But all right, let's go ahead and launch into some of these questions I got, because I think this is a good one here.
Okay.
This is probably the stalest question that I have for you, which would be the fact that, of course, you're running for governor of Kansas, and in my podcast we always put children first. So I would ask, how are your visions and policies going to be different than others that are running for this office, and how will they put children in Kansas first?
So I guess let's refine that a little bit. So I make sure I understand what you're saying. What do you mean by putting children first? What are important topics that encompass putting children first? And I can tell you where I stand on different issues, because children's a broad issue. There's a lot of things we could be talking about.
Well, yeah,
Education,
and
we could
I,
be talking
and I
about.
have I have some specific questions
Yeah.
on education and all of that jazz. But like, it is a very big viewpoint, and that's
Right.
kind of why I'm trying to see what your viewpoint on children are. What do you think exactly is the priority? Because currently, I look around and we have kids, like, to go to education. We have kids in high school that can't read.
Right. Right. We
You
have
know,
kids.
so
We I was just in a county, the actual county that I graduated from, a couple weeks ago, and I was in a school board kind of candidate forum situation, and they had the statistics of the schools, and 3rd through 12th grade in that school, 70% of them are in remedial reading and math. And that's an astounding number. First of all, as taxpayers, we're paying for that poor outcome. And then that also means that they are spending more money to supposedly give them, more individualized attention that I don't believe they're actually, would if there were if they were giving the individualized attention, we would probably have better outcomes. So,
yeah,
right, so that's kind of where I'm like, well, if we're saying that 70% are in remedial reading and are then given different they're put in that class of remedial reading and remedial math, meaning they're supposed to be getting help with that. Why are we not seeing better outcomes from that? And because statistically, it doesn't even make sense. If you are putting special attention on students to help them improve, we should see improvement. And we're not seeing improvement. We're seeing it go the other way. So,
Well, there's something to, I think, the process. This is something that I've talked about with quite a few friends of mine. I've always been a incredibly nerdy kid. Like I was a 4.0 kid
okay.
the whole way through school, but like I thought all my teachers were idiots. Like I had very, very few teachers that actually taught me much of anything. Most of it
Mhm.
was me teaching myself through the
Right.
book.
Right.
And it wasn't, and that's not me saying, oh, I just decided to do that. Like literally you would go into class and the teacher would be like, read chapter 3, answers questions 1 through 5 in the back of the book. They had an answer key, and then they surfed the internet until the period was over,
Right.
checking all like you're not teaching the kids anymore. You're
No.
not
No.
doing your job. You're just sitting behind the desk being
Yeah.
a babysitter. And something would tell me, not that I have checked, but I bet you I'm right, that if you go to these remedial classes, you will see a lot of this same activity
I
of
would agree.
teachers just kind of saying, hey, do this work that I have, this
Mhm.
busy work, while I screw off and
Right.
don't do my job. They're
If they
not
were
getting any kind of actual attention.
if they were actually, yeah, if they were actually sitting with that child, but the fact is that if 70%, which is most of the school, is not at grade level in reading and math, you really are just teaching that entire class. But what they're doing is putting them in front of computers. And so, that's how it is in Kansas. They're in front of computers. They're not having that
Yeah, I was getting
individualized
the
learning.
tail end of that right
Yeah.
there at
Yeah.
the,
So,
because I think it
you
kind of
know,
swapped over the like textbook, read the textbook, then answer it. And now they have a computer class that does all of it. And like I
right,
said, they're literally babysitters at this point. They're
right,
not actually
right.
teaching.
And and I don't blame necessarily teachers for that either, because
Yeah,
that is something
incentives.
coming down from the Board of Education and the school boards that are putting those, here's what the plan is and you have to follow it. And so they don't necessarily have a choice in a lot of times in how they're teaching these days as well. And so I know a lot of teachers that are doing their best, with what they're being given. But I think really this rests more in those school boards and the Board of Education at the state level, you know.
Well, like when I again, I know it's a small potatoes comparison, but I've done a lot of leadership and I've ran stuff before. I've been managers at jobs that I've had, and there when everybody on your team below you is not doing the right thing, it's the leadership's fault. It's not, you know what I'm saying? And this is kind of what I'm saying is, and not only is it a leadership issue, it's a leadership issue that, like I said, it's spanning across states. It's
Right.
spanning across, schools, districts. It's an issue that's also now spanning decades, and it's only getting worse.
And
So
you told me what state are you in again? Remind me.
I'm in Alabama
Yep.
currently,
Okay.
but
Okay.
I was a military brat.
Okay.
So when I
You've
say
gone.
that I can tell you this spans across states and it's
Right.
been this way for decades, like I went to Texas schools, I went to
Yeah.
Florida schools, I went to South Carolina schools, so like I have gone to numerous different school districts and seen this over and over and over and over.
So do they have school choice in your state?
I am not
Like the
aware,
the
to be
voucher
honest.
system? Like,
But that is kind of something that I do think is a good idea,
Hmm.
because at least it would create a market. I know a lot of people complain about it, saying, well, this would defund struggling schools. I was like, well, those schools would struggle because no one
Yeah.
wants to send their kids
Right.
there.
Right. Right.
So, like, I would say that would be a good thing. The people that cannot teach kids should not be teaching kids.
Well, and
And the people who are doing well should get more money for doing so.
I think let me tell you a little background on myself, and this may answer part of your question as well. So I have three sons, and my oldest is 31. He went completely through the public school system. And then I have two younger sons. One's 27 now, and one is 22. And they both went. Well, my middle son went through second grade in public school, and then my youngest went through kindergarten in public school. And then I'd already pulled my 27-year-old, I'd already pulled him out at the end of second grade and had been homeschooling him. He has autism. And then my youngest, I pulled out after kindergarten. Um, and because we knew something was going on, and because he went from the top of his class to the bottom of his class in kindergarten. Okay. And that's a warning sign right there. And we found out that he is profoundly dyslexic and profoundly dysgraphic, so lots of trouble reading and writing. And it took about a year to figure that out. And then we got him the help that he needed. So we homeschooled my 27-year-old. We homeschooled all the way through the end of high school, and then my 22-year-old I homeschooled all the way through until he went to high school, and then he went to a private school. So I've been a public, private, and homeschool parent. So I kind of, and I have kids with special learning challenges. So I've kind of run the gamut on all the ways you can educate a child, including therapies and tutoring. And I think that is important to note in this conversation, because there are a lot of things surrounding that. And we have a school choice question coming up in probably this next legislative session. They talked about it last. They've been talking about it for a couple years, and I think they will try to present it again this year. And the argument, for the most part, is it will harm our rural schools, and then homeschoolers don't like it. And I just have to argue on both sides of that, because the more I thought about how it would harm rural schools, well, typically there aren't other schools to choose from in rural settings. So, and those are the main job providers, are these teachers in these school settings, which is seems to be their main concern. It's going to take our jobs away. Where the main concern should be, are the kids being educated. And so in rural areas, I don't believe that it will harm the schools, because there won't be other options for parents to take their kids to, other than homeschooling. It's not like there's a plethora of private schools for them to choose from in the rural areas. Now, in the more urban areas, in the more populated areas, that's another case. But we already have school choice in the state of Kansas, meaning that no matter what the school district is, no matter what school district you live in, if you can get your child to the school of your choice, they can go there as long as they're accepted to go there. And so we already saw, between declining enrollment in general, because people are having less children these days, and the fact that school choice was enacted, we saw a number of people leave our Wichita School District, which is the largest city in Kansas, and head out into the neighboring school districts or the private schools. There's lots of private school choices in the in the city. And so people, might bring their kids in from another town even to attend one of those private schools. I don't really think that it affected the private school numbers that much, but I definitely think that people took their kids out of Wichita Public School District and moved them to Goddard, which is adjoining, or Mays, which is adjoining, or Andover or Derby, which are all adjoining cities to Wichita. So I think it affects that a lot more than it does the rural areas. So that's kind of argument number one against school choice. But the other one is the homeschoolers who simply don't want government in their business. Well, I don't know what your homeschooling rules are in Alabama, but in Kansas, you have to register your school. And that's it. That's the only requirement. You register your homeschool, and they do have, you have to school so many hours a year. They do nothing to keep track of that whatsoever, and it's a very broad brush of what constitutes schooling for those 1,400 hours or whatever it is. Um so in Kansas, we actually have it's very lenient for those homeschools to operate. Um, the main concern is if they accept the money, now government's in their business. But my argument is they're already in their business because you have to register the school. And if that was not if government was truly not in that homeschool business, then we would have no need for the HSLDA, which is the legal protection for homeschoolers across the United States. And so I think that that's kind of a weak argument at best. Would we see people leave the public school system to homeschool their kids because of a voucher system or a tax rebate system? Yes, probably. If they if they will get reimbursed. It was very expensive when I took my kids out of school and had to pay for absolutely everything myself, and then still pay the school system, through my taxes. So I think that, the school choice issue will pass. It's overwhelmingly popular. It's just a couple of pockets of people that are kind of fighting that. But what I think that creates is, like you were saying, this open marketplace of, do better or we won't be there. We will take our kids elsewhere. And so I think it will actually create a competition and we'll see better outcomes in students than what we're seeing right now. It'll make the public schools step up and do a better job. Private schools are already doing very well. They're incredibly good at educating students on far less money than what our taxpayers are paying currently into the school system. So I do see a lot of benefits for that, but that's I was just curious because I don't know Alabama very much. So as far as what their setup is, but
Yeah,
that's
I
kind of what we're
know
looking
my
at here.
buddy, he lives in Florida. I haven't looked into it yet. My kids are 4 and about to be 1.
Yeah.
So it's coming up time, but
Yes.
I personally plan on homeschooling
I was gonna
because
say
of, like
homeschool
I
if you
said,
can. Yep.
yeah, I don't trust,
Mm-mm.
this is something that I was going to bring up with you as well, is like between, the lack of actually educating the the fact that what they do want to teach seems to be pretty far over the line of indoctrination.
Yeah. In a lot of
And
cases, yeah.
and again, this is like people will say that this is new, and it's like, dude, they
Mm-mm.
told me that FDR wasn't filmed in his wheelchair because they respected him so much. I was like,
Yeah.
no, it's because he was throwing journalists in prison. That's
Mhm.
why they didn't put him in his like. It's insane, like the level of
Mhm.
uh inaccuracy there is to it, because it's like trying to really get you to go down this line,
Right.
and that is a red flag for me.
And we were, I was seeing the trend when my kids were starting in school that um I was seeing it with my oldest and I couldn't do anything about taking him out. But he was doing well in school and they were still teaching well at that point. Cuz he's, almost 32 now. But when I was in school, we had the choice we actually left our school day. And if we wanted to go to a Bible study, that was available during our school day. And
Yeah,
it
that
wasn't
after
counted
school
against
stuff.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't even after school, it was middle of the school day. We'd leave for an hour, go across the street to the church and have Bible school, and that was completely acceptable. We didn't get counted, nothing was held against us for it, and not everybody went, but maybe about half went. Half of our class went, and that was something that was available, and that was not available by the time my son got to school, and so my oldest son, and so when I started to see that trend, plus I was seeing the effects of No Child Left Behind on my second child, where, I'd go in for a parent-teacher conference, and they'd say, "Well, he did okay here. He completely failed here." And I said, "Oh, well, that's very troubling. Gosh, that's upsetting." And they'd be like, "Oh, don't worry about it. He didn't really need to know that yet." And I said, "He's a special needs student. Why would you be teaching him something he doesn't need to know then? Like, why are you not focusing on making sure that he has these skills down before you're trying to throw other things at him?" And so I was seeing that, and then they were moving him up a level. By the time I took him out of school at the end of second grade, when we started third grade, I had to take him all the way back to first grade and start over and teach him again the things he should have known in first grade. And so, but I will say, when he graduated, and he had already been held back a year in preschool. So we'd kept him, like, pre-K, we kept him back a year. So he's already a year behind his age, and he graduated on time. He graduated actually before his 18th birthday.
Yeah, I
So,
that's another thing I'm huge on. It's like, dude, these kids should not be spending this time in school. That's another
yeah,
thing. If you look at how much repetition there is to everything, that just, like I said, it's for the slower kids in class to get it.
right.
But if you were to take one of the slower class kids in class aside and really just break it down,
Hmm.
that's really all it took.
Right,
And instead they just try to keep repeating it, hoping that that kid's going to get it, and it
right,
ends up leaving that kid behind and boring the crap out of the other
right,
kids.
right. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's I'm 33 myself, so
Mhm.
yeah, like I've seen a lot of this, you know, in my opinion, go horribly wrong. So
Right.
I
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
another big one that I would say that, kind of to stay on the same schooling issue that doesn't come up is, I would argue, security. We have to
Hmm.
worry about our kids, getting,
Safety. Yeah.
harmed in schools now.
Hmm.
So what is your stance on, like, how do you think that this stuff could be prevented? Obviously, given the shirt, I'm not
Right.
for getting rid of the guns.
Right. Right.
I'm more of a hard target person,
You,
but
you
what do you
know,
think?
a very interesting idea was brought to me the other day, and it was to place veterans inside of our schools, and being the inside of our public schools, and be or our private schools, because our private schools are targets as well. So, and some a lot of the private schools will have, like, I don't know what they call them, enforcement officers, or what do they call them? But private
Yeah,
schools
the
are
LEOs.
largely, yeah, they're largely left unprotected. And as we've seen in this past year with the shooting at the Catholic school and things like that, there isn't those protections. And so somebody brought that into, why not place veterans in those school settings? They've been trained, have they not? They've been trained, and it would also give them a level of value that they may not. I know a lot of veterans struggle outside of the military because of how they're trained to be, and how and it would give them a place as well to really be productive and really feel like they are contributing to society, in the role, in somewhat of a role that they were trained, which is to protect, and take out enemies, whatever. So, I think that that's an
Something
interesting thought process on that.
something that I've kind of thought hard about, because I used to be way more on that, because I'm not opposed to it.
Right.
So don't get me wrong. I just don't know if it's as good of a solution as an actual gun-free zone. This is
Right.
something that I've said before, is like, gun-free zones, that idea isn't new. Like, in the Wild West, they had it at saloons.
Hmm.
But they didn't just say you can't have a gun in here. There was a guy that checked.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And then he took your gun, and then you went in there and you drank, and then when you were done, he gave it back to you and you left.
Right.
So
Yeah, nobody's
I
checking guns at the door of any
yeah,
place.
it's like if your gun-free zone is enforced by sticker,
Right.
then you're not gonna have a whole lot of it's not gonna do anything.
There
It's
is
just gonna
better
create a soft target where someone knows they can go and shoot at people and
right.
they're not gonna shoot back.
There is better security at concerts than there are in our schools. At concerts, around here, you can't take anything larger in than a bag about this size for ladies. And it has to be, well, it's either that or it used to be a clear bag so you could see everything in it. And they reduced it down to this small bag and then they check it. They open it up. They look everything over. You got to go through metal detectors. You got to prove that you are not carrying something.
Banks
Our
and
our bank, yeah,
airports
our
and
airports, yeah, way more
like
protected
we
than
know how to do this.
yeah,
Like that's kind of the thing is like I feel like we know how to do this, we're just not doing it. And that's
right,
why I wonder why that's not
right,
the actual plan. You
yeah.
know what I'm saying? I'm not saying those veterans aren't an important part of this process. You know,
Well, they could be
somebody's
the
got to
ones that are
stand
checking.
by the metal detectors.
Yeah,
But, you know, like if you pair this stuff together, I think that's
mhm,
really a large
yeah,
portion of that because, you know, a kid should not be walking into there with a knife or a gun or anything. You
no,
know, you shouldn't be able to walk into a school while it's open
yeah,
point blank in the story. While the kids are in class, you should not be able to just walk through the front doors
right,
and
right,
do whatever.
right. I agree. Yep.
So I think a lot of this could be solved by very simple access control
Mhm.
measures.
Yep. I agree. I agree.
So that I don't know. That's just my.
Yeah.
It's like I said, like actually a gun-free zone. Let's
Mhm.
make sure the guns
Right.
don't get in there.
Right.
Is really where I'm at. I've also seen that on, you know, I've kind of searched your little website there. You talk about making healthcare affordable, and to me, that's obvious how this will affect children.
Mhm.
What strategies do you actually plan to employ to make that happen?
Well, I'll kind of go through what I see happening in Kansas, and that might be a little more helpful. My plan when I first get in there, because I'm not in politics. I'm the grassroots business owner that has not been in politics. And actually to me that's a benefit. It's a benefit to a lot of people because we've had career politicians in there for a long time and they say they're doing these things. They say they're going to do these things, but they really don't have any incentive to do them. They are getting their pockets lined by big money deals, but they really don't have any incentive to follow through with what they're campaigning on. And and so one of my first things that I'm going to do is go through every single department in the state with a fine-tooth comb, audit it, look for inefficiencies, look for wasteful spending, look for places that we can shore up and while not taking away value but making them more effective in what they're doing, and that will save money. So for example, this past year, um, I learned that we were paying for as taxpayers in this state for open positions, employment positions in departments as if somebody was working that job. These were empty spots. We were paying the salary for that spot as taxpayers. And then the departments were taking that money and just using it however they wanted instead of paying an employee. So that's one example of things. So, as far as making healthcare more affordable, I think that that's a much bigger scenario because we're talking about not just state level but federal level. So there's things that as a governor I can influence on that federal level, but I can't actually change things on the federal level. So other people have to agree to that as well. Now, if things get pushed back to the states where we have different set of controls, then we'll have a little bit different conversation. So, but one of the areas, and I think mostly what I was talking about with that, um, talking about healthcare is there's a lot of pushback about expanding Medicaid in Kansas. Now, I don't know if you guys have expanded Medicaid in Alabama, but to me, the Medicaid system in this state is completely broken. Just like if you point to any area of this state, it is not functioning properly. Name a category, it's not functioning properly. So that would be an issue for me when people say, well, we should just expand Medicaid, throw more people and more money in it. And I said, well, that's the exact wrong thing to do. We don't throw good money after bad. When the system's broken, you fix the system. And the problem with the system is that providers are not being paid adequately to provide that service. They're being paid pennies on the dollar for services that if they just charge cash, they would make more money and be able to pay their overhead. So they're struggling paying their overhead basically. And in rural Kansas, they don't really have a choice. The providers pretty much have to take Medicaid in that area because there's a lot of people on Medicaid in those areas versus cash paying customers or insurance paying customers. And quite frankly, even the insurance side of thing, that's a whole other issue because they're also not paid appropriately. They're exorbitant fees and you have to earmark an entire person or department to handle simply insurance claims, and it's just not the overhead is too high compared to what they're actually being reimbursed. So the concern is it's gonna these rural hospitals and rural providers are going under, and they say, so expand Medicaid and that'll fix it. And I said, well, no, it actually won't. It'll cause a faster spiral because you're now putting more people on Medicaid of underpaid providers for, services, and it's just going to make it collapse that much faster. In other populated areas like Wichita, where it's a much larger, and diverse area, you have very few providers that provide Medicaid services because they have the choice. There are plenty of people who can pay cash and do pay cash, and a lot of them don't even take insurance anymore. A lot of them have went to a concierge medicine style where you're paying a monthly fee. You get far lower costs on healthcare across the board. Um, there's other plans that you can join that are like MediShare and things like that are not really insurance, but they're shared by a population of people to pay those expenses. Um, and then so dumping more people and more money into that does not equal more providers now offering Medicaid. It just makes it harder for more people to find providers that are able to meet their needs.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that's the answer at all. And I think that completely reworking the Medicaid system is the answer. And again, there's a lot of fraud, there's a lot of misuse, there's a lot of inefficiencies, and quite frankly, we need to reimburse those providers to an adequate level that they can actually pay their bills and stay in business for these communities. And I don't think that that's out of line when you look at what they're providing. And if you go in and you say, okay, what's my insurance cost for this? It's, 3 to 4 times more than if you said, well, what's my cash price for this? And that's simply because they're trying to cover that overhead and those expenses. And so it's a disservice on both sides. It's a disservice to the provider and it's a disservice to the patient. So we just need to be revamping both the insurance and the Medicaid system so that we can incentivize that. I don't care.
Well,
90% of what I do, I have one of the major medical plans that only covers my hospital, and everything else pretty much I pay cash for because it's so much less expensive. And I also like alternative medicines that are not covered by any insurance either. And they work much more effectively and better than mainstream medicine does. And so I'd love to see some of those things covered by insurance companies. I don't know that's an uphill battle all by itself. And again, probably not on the state level, but the federal level. So, yeah.
well, that's the big nerd side of me. Is the two big things is foreign policy and economics.
Hmm.
Economics is what I actually went to college for. I uh, if you look at inflation, what inflation is, the rise of price of anything, it's the rise of the supply of money in relation to the supply of goods or services.
Right.
So when you have insurance, it's definitionally inflationary because people have more access to money than they
Right.
would if it was just coming out of whatever they got paid those 2 weeks.
Right.
The same thing happens when you add Medicaid to this big bundle. So a lot of this is because of the amount of money that's in, that's available to be captured. It causes the prices to start to rise, if
Well,
that
and
makes any sense.
yeah, and then on top of that, when we talk about Medicaid, I think that there are some services that should not be covered by Medicaid that taxpayers are paying for, that if you're not on Medicaid, you're probably paying cash for, or you're probably, you know, there's some things that we would have to look at with that to say, is this really something the public should be
Yeah, like
paying
I'm
for?
saying, like if you look at like LASIK, right?
Right.
Like LASIK is a surgery that came out not too long ago in the grand scheme of surgeries,
Right.
and it has dropped like a rock in the price that it costs.
Right.
And the
Right.
reason being is because you can't go on Medicaid and say, "Hey, I want to go get a LASIK surgery," and you can't go to your insurance company and say it.
Right.
You have to save up the money and go buy that. So
Right.
they have to keep dropping that price down to get people to actually get the surgery.
Right.
So if you can see this in real time from that, but you can also see like some kind of kidney surgery that's been, developed a century ago that just keeps flying up and up and up and up and up and up and up. So it's
Right.
like one of those things that is pretty obvious what's going on is the increase of money. It's the same
Right.
thing that people point to when they go, what's going on with all this inflation that's going on right now? It's like something like 90% of the money that's in circulation right now is printed in the last 3 or 4 years.
Right. Right. Well,
So
we were
yeah, like
printing a lot of money during COVID, so
so if you increase the supply of money, you have more money chasing less stuff.
right.
It's
Right.
just that simple.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a scary situation because like when you look at it with any kind of real soberness, you go, okay, well, if we just completely cut off Medicaid, I know, I know that it will cause the prices of healthcare to go down.
Right.
But will it cause it to go down low enough that the people who are currently benefiting from Medicaid will then be able to afford healthcare? That is
Probably
a
not.
gamble and it's a
Yeah, that's a
question.
big gamble. Yeah. I truly believe, my son, my 27-year-old, with his disabilities, he's on both Medicaid and Medicare as an adult, because he's been deemed fully disabled. And, there are people who truly do need that. He struggles to work more than about 15 hours a week because he gets too overstimulated, it's just too much for him, um, to be out that much in society. And, we've worked through this before. He's had to work some extra hours, and you can see how it physically affects him. And so, there are legitimate people and reasons for needing disability, needing that Medicaid help. There's obviously health concerns. But so I spent 15 years in pharmacy and worked in a lot of healthcare and hospital settings. And one of the things that has always been a driving factor for me is we need to figure out the root cause of whatever it is, and fix the root cause of things. Instead, what we do, especially in pharmacy, is we band-aid and the symptoms. We treat the symptoms without addressing the cause of the symptoms. And now there's some, again, legitimate reasons for some medications, life-saving medications, that somebody would die if they didn't immediately receive them. I'm not knocking any of that. But there's a lot of other things that and this goes into the conversation about our food, about about our environment, our environmental factors. If there was an incentive for people to take better care of their health, we would see a different outcome. But we have been, for lack of a better term, poisoning our citizens with chemicals in our food, and the fact that we have soil depletion that means that the foods we eat today, even if they are really good food, really good food, they're not as healthy as they once were, simply because the nutrients are no longer in the soil the way that they're supposed to be. And they started adding nutrients to food, but that's never an answer, because most of the time they are incomplete nutrients. And do you know what happens when you put an incomplete nutrient in your body? It pulls the rest of that nutrient to complete its action from your body. And so when we when we talk about, like, people supplementing with calcium, it's not the full calcium molecule, and so it pulls the rest of what it needs
From
to complete its
magnesium.
action, yeah,
Yeah.
from your body, and further depleting your body. And so there's no replacement for good nutrition. We just haven't had access to good nutrition for a very long time. And so that's left us with, now we have to treat the symptoms of bad nutrition with medications, which also further complicate the body, and make this a whole cycle of problems. And so, I think there's a lot to be said for revamping our healthcare system, for that reason, into taking a completely different approach, not band-aiding issues, but going to the root cause. And you do see doctors that are taking that approach now. And again, they're not covered by insurance, because none of the stuff they do is covered by insurance when they're talking about supplementation, good, solid, complete supplementation versus and healthy living versus medicating. And so, and I'm blanking on the name of what those doctors are now. I know that they have a specific name, um, but that's what we need to see more of, in order to see actually a drop in the price of healthcare as well. Because if our bodies were healthier, we wouldn't need kidney replacements and
Yeah,
liver
80%
treatments, and
is the like, and that's from, I want to say, the
yeah,
CDC. It was like 80% of all of our health issues are completely preventable.
absolutely.
So like, yeah, you're in a big game.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of my viewers who watch my podcast often would wonder why I'm not asking you a bunch of foreign policy questions, and that's because you're running for
I'm
governor.
running for governor. Yeah.
But
I will, here
there
is my
is
one take.
one very important one that I have to ask, and I'll let you
Okay.
give your take on whatever. And that is, a huge libertarian and very Republican movement as well is called Defend the Guard. And
Okay.
Defend the Guard, I'm not sure if you've heard of this movement, but this is a
Okay.
movement to make it where it is illegal for the president to use National Guardsmen for any purpose unless there's a official declaration of war.
Right.
Would you support such legislation if it
You
came
know,
across your desk?
that's a good question, because I'd have to see exactly how that's worded before I could. It's not something that I've thought of to this point. So I don't know that I have a good answer for you today, because what I have found is that the best intended items often come with a lot of things attached to it. So it would depend on the individual bill that would actually cross my desk as to what I would agree to and what I would not agree with. So, do I think that, if you're talking specifically about some of the scenarios of, taking the National Guard into DC and things like that to stop crime, did they stop crime? I guess is the question. Did it accomplish what it was supposed to accomplish? I don't even know the stats on it. I'm asking.
I don't know. I'm more worried about like when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about sending, our National Guardsmen that are supposed to be protecting our states to
Yes.
go run off to Libya or Syria
Gotcha. No,
or
I would definitely not support that at all. No, no.
that's kind of where I'm at. I'm like,
Okay.
these guys like yeah, I mean, if you have a big riot in
Yeah.
Kansas, that's
Yeah.
what the National Guards is
I
for.
want them to stop
Like that's kind of my point of
crazy
like the
crime. Yeah.
point of National Guardsmen is that
Yeah.
it's for, if there's a hurricane, if there's a flood, if the like they're not supposed to be war fighters
Right. No, I would
and
agree.
unless
And
really hits the fan, you know?
yeah, and I what's interesting is that I actually sent products over to a National Guard unit that was running around Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia, and they were friends of mine, and they actually I didn't know this was going to happen. I sent them a bunch of like healthcare products, skincare and things like that, for their group to use, and they actually flew flags for me and gave me the flag when they came back, and I that was very um that was one of those moments where I was like, that's pretty darn cool, um for doing something that sounds so simple to take care of our our National Guard or our military, to have that done. But no, in general, I know that we have declining military, um people signing up for the military. We need to, and I've been posed with the question, should we make it mandatory for people to go in the military like they do in Israel? They have, everybody has to go serve a couple years, um and on the from the outside of that, it sounds like a great idea because I think that it teaches people, um and exposes them to something that they might not have had in their life. And I think it teaches discipline and those kind of things. But constitutionally, I don't think that that's something that can be done. And so I
There's a
think
13th Amendment that says
right.
something about involuntary servitude that
That's
might get
correct.
in the way there.
That's correct. That's correct. And so while I think that that's a something that should be encouraged, because I think we have such a problem in our population these days of people not being involved at all or not even understanding what it means to be an American. We've gotten so off in the weeds with some of this stuff that, I would like to see more, whether it be Job Corps, whether it be military, whether it be something that is teaching our youth a skill that they can be proud of. Because I don't think a lot of kids that are growing up today, when they exit high school, are anywhere close to being proud of their country, of their life, of their future, of their opportunity. And we had a lot of those kind of programs. So my grandfather back in the 30s was in CCC camps, and went and built things and learned a trade. And I think that we're lacking in those kind of things today. And I wish that more kids were getting involved and were, whether or not the military is the right answer for that, but
Right.
Job Corps or
But
some
this
other
is kind of what I'm getting at. It's
program.
like
Yeah,
somebody who's just like, "Hey, I don't really want to go sign up to go fight a
yeah,
war, but I'll
yeah,
I'll sign up if there's a riot or a
to
flood
protect
or
our
whatever. I'll
our
throw out some
country. Yeah,
sandbags." And
yeah,
then you see those guys going off to war and you're like, "Never
right.
mind."
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know what I'm
No, I
saying? It's like
totally,
that's what that was for and
yeah,
you removed that and now if you're going to treat them just like the Marines, then why wouldn't
right,
I just join the
right.
Marines?
And the thing about it is, in Kansas, National Guard don't even have the same benefits that our military does as veterans. They
And
they
that's
don't
kind of
have.
exactly what I'm
Yeah.
getting at. They're treating them like
Mhm.
they're a second class military because that's what they signed up for. But then they're sending them off to war like they're just the regular military.
Right. Right. Yeah. Now, I will say my one thing about, I guess it's not, I mean, I guess it could be classified as foreign policy. but it's on American soil, is that I do not believe that any foreign country or company or entity should be allowed to purchase our land. And that is occurring all over the place. And the reason for that is, well, there's a lot of reasons for that. But a glaring one is when you sell United States land to another country, it's no longer United States land. I think that's a national security risk that we have. Um, and it opens a lot of doors for other problems. And so for that, US soil needs to stay US soil, period. And there's a lot of shady business going on right now, not only in Kansas but in the United States, where foreign countries are going under American shell companies and hiding the fact that they're foreign and still purchasing our land. And those are kind of things that should be deeply concerning for any American. And we just passed legislation this last session. It banned foreign entities from purchasing land around our military installations, which covers a good swath of Kansas. We have a lot of military bases in Kansas, but it still leaves, I don't know, maybe 10%. I don't know the actual number of land that's available to anybody to buy. And I think that that's something that needs to be shored up for sure. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know 100%. Like, the reason I would say I don't know 100% would be like if somebody's trying to do business here, if someone wants to build a factory, they would have to buy land
No, they
here.
can lease it. Companies are much more likely to lease land anyways, because they're able to pay, and I know this because I'm a business owner. I would rather lease land and pay that company because it's a tax write-off at that point. When you purchase, you don't get to write that off. So it would be beneficial for that company to lease that land versus purchasing it. And so a lot of companies don't actually own the land or the buildings they're operating out of. They have leased those. I was actually offered to purchase some land in a building that a company was operating out of, like in Virginia or something. And because of the tax benefits, they lease it and they can write that off on their taxes. So I don't think that is something that would inhibit business from coming in. In fact, that would be a benefit. So the fact that they're wanting to buy it should be questionable. Um, why are they buying it when they know that they would get a better deal if they got the tax write-off? So that's number one. But there's other issues. Um, we see, and I don't want to get into the marijuana debate, but when we look at places like Oklahoma that just opened up and just let anybody and everybody come in, and when they legalize marijuana, they are now seeing bad effects of that. And some of that is with the people that purchase the land. It's a free for all over there. And to me, that's troubling because it was putting landowners in positions where they felt bullied and forced to sell their land to foreign entities. So that's also a concern. So I think that there just needs to be something done about that. I don't like to see that.
Where
If
do
the
you
US
stand on that debate? Would you veto legislation on that along that lines? I
along
I personally am against obviously kids using anything, but
right. Well, so in the marijuana debate, there's a couple different things to think of. Um, I cannot say that I would be okay with that. And there's a lot of reasons why, but coming from the medical background, but um really it boils down to, in the state of Kansas, we do not have the infrastructure if it were to be legalized tomorrow. And so, looking at it from that standpoint alone, I don't think it's a question of if it will be legalized. I think it's a question of when. And if we were to get a Democratic governor or a Democratic president who legalized it nationwide or legalized it statewide, we would not be set up, and we would be in a position like Oklahoma that it's a free for all. And I think that that's a very scary thought process. Again, it goes back to not allowing foreign countries to purchase our land. Um, Personally, if it was done from a medical standpoint, I would like to see that, where it went through a doctor and through your pharmacy. And I know we probably don't agree on this together, and that's okay, but through a doctor and through a pharmacy, because there are things that need to be monitored if they're using it for very specific medical conditions. And I think that that deserves that monitoring, um, through a physician who's monitoring if somebody has epilepsy and they're using it for epilepsy. If a veteran's using it for PTSD, if somebody's using it for glaucoma, those are all medical conditions that should be supervised by a doctor anyhow. So any medication or any treatment in regards to that should also be supervised by that medical physician to
Well,
make sure that
actually,
they're
when it's done in a medical capacity, I actually 100% don't disagree with that. Like that's something that I've said before. It's like if you're doing something in a medical capacity, there should be a dosage. There should be
right,
a like all of this makes sense if you're doing things in a medical capacity, but not necessarily from a recreational capacity.
right, right.
Now, what I do know like, I don't know a whole lot about Kansas personally, but what I do know is the insane amount of money that is being spent in Kansas to prevent the marijuana from Colorado getting to basically the rest of the country, given that it's a border state.
Right.
So like, given that you're looking at trying to reduce money, wouldn't you think that trying to figure out that system would be a lot more efficient use of the money?
I I think
You know what I
again,
mean?
I'd have to look at the whole thing since I don't have access to what is going on to see what those actual numbers are. But we're completely surrounded by states that are now legalized. Nebraska legalized in 24. Um, Missouri's legalized. Colorado's legalized and Oklahoma's legalized. So we have states around us, all the way around us. I don't see that our legislature is going to go in that direction. And being the governor,
It just seems like you're sticking your finger in the dam at this point,
yeah,
like
yeah. Well, and I really do think that, even if the legislature, we could turn that over and end up with a lot of Democratic legislators that decide to approve it. We just need to be prepared for that scenario, and currently we are not. And I think that that's the first step before we even talk about that question. We have to make sure that we are doing everything to protect our citizens, because there is no amount of money that I would accept or do something for if I thought it would harm the people of this state.
of
That's
course.
far more important to me than any amount of money. And so, so when people argue with me about the money, that we're going to bring in the state, or we're going to save the state, or we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to fund all this stuff, that sounds great, but we don't have those things in place to actually protect our citizens. And so at this point, until I can't even address that question until we've fixed some of these other infrastructure things. So to me, I mean, I'm of the mindset, if you're going to do it, you're going to do it whether it's legal or not. So, it's not really a question about the drug. Do I think that everybody should be using marijuana? Probably not. And I have a basis for that.
I
Um,
agree.
I have a basis for that based on a book called Brave New World. Did you read that book? Okay, I
Yes.
love that book. This is one that I refer to a lot, because I do believe that there are a lot of things in our society, and I have a hard time not believing that marijuana is being used in this respect to maintain some type of control. And again, that if we introduce something into society and say, "Oh, it's okay," and we do know the effects of marijuana, and we do know that it can slow people down and it can stop them from being a little bit more productive in certain people. And for me, that's a problem because that looks a lot like lining up at the end of your workday to get a pill popped in your mouth to go zone out for 16 hours so you don't complain about what's actually happening to you and then turn around and go back to work the next day. That scenario feels very similar in this, even though the drugs are very different. And so I'm always wary of those kind of things being promoted as what is the underlying reason that those things are being promoted.
Yeah,
And
that's why whenever I talk about drugs, I'm obviously pretty radical compared to most people, given that I'm a libertarian. That's
right,
why I always try to focus less on, like, it's not about being pro drug. And I think anyone that's arguing from a pro drug standpoint
right. No,
is just an idiot. Like, it's pretty obvious what the damage and harm that drugs can do.
right.
It's just a question of how are we addressing it, and is the way that we're addressing it actually effective?
I agree.
And it's the same thing that I've said with, with my kids. Like, my dad and I've had this conversation numerous times, and it's something like, obviously I don't want my kids using marijuana,
Right.
but I also, if my kids use marijuana, don't want them locked in a cage for doing
Uh,
so.
right, right, right.
So it's like
Well,
it's the same thing.
and quite frankly, the stuff that is actually legal in our state, which is the Delta 8 and Delta 9 products, I've had many discussions with people who are using these products medicinally to try and handle some of the issues that they're having, that are begging for it to be legalized because these products are damaging them on a completely different level,
They're
and they are
not
getting
as
into the
nearly
hands of our
as,
kids, and
yeah.
that to me is very troubling. Um so so there's two sides to that coin that I don't think everybody is considering. When you look at the amount of chemicals being put in those Delta 8 and Delta 9 products, the number of people I've talked to that have become very ill from those products, that have uh, had very weird effects from those products, they're clearly not good. They're clearly not good for your body.
Yeah, it's almost on a level of, I don't know if you remember this, but it was a big deal when I was about a 20 or so, was the whole Spice K2 thing.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
kind of really reminds me of that, where it's just like, the regular thing, it's not great for you.
Right.
But now you're just like, you got
You're
people doing
legalizing
stuff
something
that's
that's far worse.
literally
Yeah.
poison
Exactly.
because they're trying to get the effects from the real thing that isn't poison.
That
It's
isn't
not
poison.
great for you, but
Yeah.
it's not
That's
poison.
correct. Yeah. No, that's
So,
and that's kind of what I struggle with as well. It's not that I am pro marijuana, it's that I am pro not getting these worse products. I'm pro getting those gone, because they are far more detrimental than the actual
it's
drugs.
kind of
So,
the argument I make a lot of times when we talk about, like, opioids, when people want to use that as the big extreme example. I would argue that heroin, if we legalized all drugs tomorrow, heroin would not be sold.
mhm. Mhm.
Because any of these people, you talk to any opiate person that does, they would way rather just go up there and get a Percocet, or, you know what I'm saying, something that's actually been made with some kind of,
Right.
knowledge by a scientist that knows what
Right.
they're doing with quality control and all of that. They don't want to buy this crap that you
Mm.
get on the street. They're
Right.
kind of forced to.
Right.
And like I said, I'm not saying it's good to do those things, because I
No,
really don't agree with them, and I do think they're harmful to society.
they
And the
are.
big olive branch that I really give to people is, I do agree 100% that drugs should not be done in public.
Mhm.
It should be seen the same way as being public drunkenness or open
Right.
container or any of that. Drugs should not be done in public. But I don't.
I think, and of course, any drug can be abused, prescription or not,
Yeah.
and have very, very detrimental effects. And um, I have a personal family member story of watching a family member who was provided legal medications, to the point that at the end of their life, they could not be kept out of pain. And that's always a scenario that is very scary to me to think
I'm
about.
like,
I have a personal experience with a family member that was given, narcotics for pain and narcotics for pain management and treatment. And at the end of their life, they were unable to be taken out of pain, while they were on hospice. It was very traumatic to watch. It was very traumatic to realize that they were in incredible amounts of pain and there was absolutely nothing that they could do. Um, and so there's a lot to be said for, I'm a big, I'm very much against drugs in general because of that experience, watching someone go through that. And it's one of the reasons why I've taken such a different approach to health and life, because if that family member would have taken better care of their health, they would not have been in the position they were in. And some of that wasn't their fault. It was the time, it was some of these things started back in the 70s. They didn't know better. They didn't have better products or better options that we have today. And they certainly didn't have the same knowledge that we have today about what we've been putting in our bodies for, several decades longer now. So
yeah,
I think that, I don't blame that person for the choices, or the doctors for the choices that were made, but it definitely has sent me in a very different direction regarding health. And so, and what should be put in your body and what should not be put in your body. So yeah.
yeah. Like I completely agree. Like I said,
Yeah.
I have family that I've seen that happen where the reason they're hooked on a lot of these pain meds is because some doctor gave it to them and told them they had to take it for the
Right.
rest of their life.
Right.
And like I said, it's between that's really horrifying from the opioid epidemic that's going on right now.
Right.
And that's another something that we could talk about too is
Yeah.
the what they call overdoses. I don't think it's fair to call it an overdose because, like, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a 90s kid, but like when I grew up, when we talked about an overdose, it was an addict
Mhm.
that was doing drugs for, maybe a decade. And
Mhm.
they finally got to a point that you're kind of talking about where it doesn't really matter how much they do, they're not feeling it anymore. So
Mhm.
they do so much that it kills them
Right.
because their body can't handle it. But even if it could, they wouldn't have felt it.
Right. Right.
Right. So it's like that's what an overdose has always been in my mind when we're talking about people,
Right.
abusing drugs. And it
Right.
is a very sad
It
situation.
is a very
But
sad
I
situation.
cannot talk about how much more sad it is for some 19-year-old to be like, I'm going to try Coke for the first time. And then they die because
Mhm.
there's fentanyl in it.
Right.
To me, that is not overdosing. That is
No,
being poisoned.
absolutely. And that's a whole other issue. I yeah, that's a whole other issue, to get into, which I'm not prepared to get into at all. But we have people in this state. I know personal, friends who have lost children to fentanyl. That is a terrifying, when I think back to when I was in high school, you didn't worry about those things. And
Yeah, laced drugs was more of a joke to us. It was like,
Right.
why would somebody put something expensive in our already, like you're
Yeah.
just making the drugs better. Ha ha ha. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Right.
Like,
And things like that. Like I remember hearing stories of my parents when because they were hippies and that's what they did. And they would go to these parties and they'd be, everybody dump pills in a bowl and everybody takes pills. And I thought that's really dumb. But today, for that to happen, it could literally mean you die because something could be laced. And not that there weren't risks. Obvious, there are risks with a pill party when you have no idea what pill you're taking, but it's even more so today because of that fentanyl issue. And so I don't know. I wish I had an answer to that. I don't know what what the answer is going to be ultimately to get that out of our country. I don't know that we can at this point, just like any other drug that's entered our country.
it's like
Um,
one of those things that I really think would be more solved, like I said, if things were legal. Because it's
right.
like if you went down to the CVS and bought you a Percocet and there was fentanyl in it, CVS is
Is
never
liable.
selling
Yeah.
anything ever again.
Right. Yeah.
So like it's just one of those things that I really think that a lot of this is caused by it being driven into the darkness.
Mhm.
And like I said, that's not because I think that we should condone. I think there also has to be a really firm point made from the government saying that straight up, just because something's legal doesn't mean it's good to do.
Right. Right.
You know
No.
what I mean? So
Well, I mean,
like
yeah, we put Surgeon General's warnings on cigarettes.
cigarettes
Yeah.
and alcohol. And it's like,
Right.
it's not to say that I don't think that there should be an encouragement. I
No.
don't think that this
No.
stuff should be celebrated. I have issues with a lot of the like more pot culture that does that. It's like it's not necessarily something that should be celebrated. I
Right.
get enjoying your thing, but like I also would see a little weirdness to somebody doing that around alcohol or any other drug. It's
Right.
like it it's
Yeah.
not something to
And
be celebrated, it's just something that you like, you know?
and we're seeing a trend of a lot more people, moving away from alcohol and cigarettes and things like that as well. And I think those are good things because those are not healthy
That's
behaviors.
why I
Even
do the vape.
even casual drinking, that sort of thing. It's not healthy. It doesn't mean that it's wrong if you decide to have a drink. But and I'm a Bible believing woman, and the Bible says do not drink to excess. So I think
Right.
I don't think that just applies to alcohol. I think that really applies to everything. You could plug in
Well,
any
yeah.
word in that. Do not do it to excess
Well, I
and
would argue that it's have no other gods before me.
right.
At a
Yeah,
certain
true.
point, what are you worshiping this thing? You
Right.
know what I mean? If this thing is controlling your life the way God should, to be real,
Yeah.
like your every moment, your every waking desire is how am I going to get more drugs?
Right.
That's the
That's the
devotion you
problem.
should be showing in a different direction.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
I'm very religious as well, but
Okay.
that's kind of like I don't know. I think it's more in that I honestly look at the state that way in a lot of ways too, because it's like we're looking to the state to solve all our problems in
Yeah.
the way that we should be putting our faith in God.
Yep.
But
Well, and that gets into a whole nother topic of how um government is overstepped where it should be in, what our state government is supposed to be doing. We're far
that's
reaching
actually a
into
question I would have I
areas.
had for
Yeah.
you, which was what do you see as the limits of where, you and other government should be allowed to go, and
Yeah.
how
I mean,
much
it's
do you
supposed to
feel
be,
the need to stand up to the legislature when they're playing games, like that kind of question, if that makes any
yeah,
sense. I know it's
you
kind of
know,
weirdly phrased there, but
that's okay. I got you. I you know, we should be concerned with infrastructure. We should be concerned with health catastrophes. We should be concerned with, disasters. But there's a lot of things that we are into that we shouldn't be, that could be handled on a county. city and, quite frankly, a personal citizen level. And so again, when I'm going through those things, we in Kansas, and I'm sure this happened in a lot of other states, with all of the COVID money that came in to the state, that created this gluttonous overspending of and creation of jobs and creation of things, within our state that probably shouldn't be there. And again, that's one of those things that I'm going to be looking at, of why are we doing this? Why are we being responsible for this? This is something that could be handled elsewhere. Why are we trying to take control of this? And there's a lot of conversations that I've had with county commissioners, with city leaders, to talk about those things where they feel that the state is overreaching into what they're supposed to be doing. And so I don't have concrete, answers to that, but those are conversations that I'm having all the time, because I do think we're overstepping. The extent to which we're overstepping is really the question. Where does that line need to be drawn? Where was it originally set up? What was it supposed to look like? And trying to, it's much easier to not do it in the first place than to claw it back. But I think we're at a tipping point in this state, that we have to claw back some things that have been going on, to give more freedom to the counties and the cities to do what they were set up to do. And so it's not going to be an easy task by any means. And I've said this, we didn't get here in 4 to 8 years, and of course the term is 4, and a maximum of 8 years as governor. So we're not going to fix it in 4 to 8 years either. But my hope is to be able to lay a good, solid foundation that future administrations can build on, and to get that set up the correct way, I need an active population of people that are active in their communities, with their local, their school board, their city councils, their commissions, and who they're putting in those legislative seats. I need an active population. We need a good, strong governor working together to clean those legislative seats out and get people in those positions that are good servant leaders that understand how our government was originally set up, which should be, at this point, not to overstay your welcome. I would love to see term limits, but let's use the term not to overstay your welcome, not to create a career out of it, but to understand that you're there for a limited amount of time to do your job and then go home and let the next person, come in. And I think that that's going to, obviously always be an ongoing thing that the population has to stay active in, or will revert back to what we've allowed over the past 20, 30, 40 years, to arrive at where we are today. And so, yeah, I think that there's some gross overreach at this point that we need to scale back on. But what that exactly looks like, I won't know till I'm sitting behind that desk and combing through everything. I learn something new every day that we're doing, and I'm just like, well, all right. You don't feel like you can take 2 steps without running into something that the city, county, state, or federal government controls at this point. So that doesn't really
Yeah,
sound
and that
too
and
right to
that's
me.
that's like the old joke that libertarians always share, is like, it's like libertarians and media, and it's a guy going, "Why can't I own nuclear weapons?" And then it's just like libertarians in real life, and it's a guy at the city council meeting going, "Why can't I paint my own shed?"
Right, right. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's all of those things. It's like, come on, there's some things that we can make
Yeah,
decisions.
it does get excessive at a certain point, and it's just like, there's something to, like, we have to start paying attention where our energy and efforts are
Mhm.
going towards. It's something that I've said before. It's something I've said about, like, this is why I have no problem having you on. Obviously, we don't agree on everything. I have a bunch of lefties on, and everywhere in
And that
between,
and
because I
and that's
think
okay.
I think honesty is what we really have to start
Yes.
looking for at this point, because at this point it, we can't play games with all these people who are full of crap.
No.
It's just it's getting old. You
Well,
know,
and
if what we can't actually figure anything out if the person that we're engaging with isn't actually telling us what they actually think.
right, right. Well, and what I think is really important is to understand that we are not going to agree on everything, and that is perfectly okay. I have Democrats and independents who have told me they are going to switch parties in order to vote for me in the primary because I am registered as a Republican. And I have told them my honest opinion of that. I said, that's great if you want to do that, but I need you to understand that we're not going to agree on everything. I will not sacrifice my moral values for anybody of any party, of any person, of anything. This is what I personally believe is correct, and I follow it in my daily life. But that still leaves a lot of things for us to discuss and to work through that would actually improve our lives in this state. So I welcome conversation from everybody who is open to it. And I operate under these simple rules. Bring me facts. We're only going to talk about facts. Don't you have to be respectful. So, don't come at me with, calling names and raising your voice and not wanting to have that conversation. There's a time and a place for that, for people to be righteously angry and those kind of things, but when you are attempting to reach an agreement, that is not the time. And so, being respectful to each other's space and not raising voices and not being, mean is great. And then I don't allow um not so much cussing, I don't really care, but name calling. I had someone stand in front of me, and I told him, he told me, I'm a Democrat and I'm not going to agree with you, and I said, that's great, I just operate under these three rules, they're pretty simple. And the last one was, don't call names. And I see it on both sides. You see the right, you see Republicans slamming Democrats with all these, calling them libtards, calling them all these names. And you see it on the left, I don't know how many times I was at the state fair for 10 days. I was the only candidate that stayed at the fair all 10 days talking to people. And I got called a red-faced Nazi lover more times than I can count. I was called, you must love
Yeah.
pedophiles, all these things. And I said, look,
What's
that's
what's
not
crazy to
constructive.
me,
Well, it's not
it's a
constructive.
boy that cried wolf situation for
Right.
me. It's like there are real Nazis out there,
There
guys.
are real pedophile lovers out there, and I definitely am
Like,
not one
let's
of
let's
them.
not
So,
cry wolf
yeah,
here. Like,
yeah,
there are actual Nazis. Like,
right,
something I've told people, Adam Waffen. Google that and tell me the Proud Boys are Nazis after that.
right, right,
You're like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they're great people,
right,
but it's pretty obvious they're screwing with you.
right.
If you go look at real Nazis, they're
Mhm.
not playing.
No, they're not playing. And
They are
that's
not
what I'm saying.
playing.
Like, some of these words that are thrown back and forth are not productive in any manner. And so I said, we just won't have that. And he started calling one of our former governors, excuse my language, he called him brown shit. His name is Brownback, but he called him brown shit. And I said, I'm sorry, we're going to have to end this conversation because you broke rule number 3, which was don't name call. And I said, if you can, come back and not do that, we can continue with this conversation. And he did it 2 more times, and I said, nope, I'm sorry, we're done. And because that's really important. If we really want to have a constructive conversation, we need to be able to abide by those 3 rules across the board, no matter who you are. Don't call
Yeah.
names, don't, be respectful, and bring facts. I had somebody come to me and say, what do you, and this was a Democratic couple that had come up to my table at the fair, and they said, and I'd been having a conversation with the husband, and he said, I actually agree with you on a lot of things. I said, well, that's great because when I'm governor, I won't just be governor for Republicans, I'll be governor for everybody. And we need to be able to come and have constructive conversations about important topics, um, even though we're not going to agree on a lot of things. And the wife kind of chimed in and she said, well, what are you going to do when that woman whose baby dies in the womb and the doctor refuses to remove it? What are you going to do about that? And I said, well, I said, that's not occurring, first of all. And she said, yes, it is. And I said, no, it actually isn't, because it happened to me. So I know that's not occurring. And she said, she kind of stammered for a minute. She said, well, it could. And I said, okay, if you want to bring me actual instances of where that's occurred, deal in facts and bring me those facts of cases where that's actually occurred, then we can have that discussion. But just saying it could happen sometime, somewhere, somehow is not going to be a constructive conversation either, because that's not dealing in facts. And the fact is, medically speaking, if a child dies in utero, it is actually safer for that mother to deliver that child naturally. Our bodies were created to carry that process out. And so if doctors are saying we're going to wait a little bit and see if your body expels that baby naturally, that's an actually more medically safe way to do it. Now, if there's other factors that come into it where mom's life is in danger, something is going wrong with, that's a whole other scenario. And that was what the case was with me. There was something else going on, and the baby had already died and had to be removed. That's not something that's occurring on a regular basis out there where they're saying, nope, we're not doing that, because medically speaking, it is safer. And so I said, when you can come back with facts of those cases occurring where doctors are saying in the life of the mother is at danger and I'm still not going to do it, then we can have that conversation. And they left. The husband said, okay, we're going to have to go now. And I said, that's fine. But please come back with facts, and I'm happy to talk with you. But they understood that they weren't speaking in facts. And so that conversation was not going to go anywhere with me. And I think when you are able to bring that to people, and they are common sense thinking people, we can have better conversations. And I think that that's really important. There are people that just want to yell at you, and they don't really have those facts to back them up. But I welcome that. If
There's a
somebody
lot of
has
people who
facts,
are just caught in their team,
yeah,
and that's a really sad thing
it is.
to
It
me,
is. If somebody
because
really has a legitimate situation that's occurring somewhere, bring it to me. I need to know about it. I need to know about it, and I will investigate it to find out the facts on it. But you got to bring me real facts. Another one was, what are you going to do about citizens in Western Kansas being ripped out of their homes, American citizens? And I went to, and I happened to be going to Western Kansas to speak. And I had several papers that were following me. And I asked them, I said, do you have documented instances of this occurring? Because if there is, I want to know about it. And they told me, we have no documented instances of this actually occurring. This would have made news here. And so I said, okay, there has to be some fact in there somewhere. Was someone taken from their home? Probably by ICE. That's probably a true statement. Were they legal citizens? Probably not, because there's been not in our state any instance of that occurring that I've been able to find factual evidence of. But if somebody has factual evidence of their United States citizen being taken from their home, um, that's a big problem for me, for no other reason than they think they might. That I do want to know about that, because that's those are constitutional questions at that point of whether that constitutional right was not upheld. But those are the things that haven't been brought to me in any kind of factual situation. And not to get into ICE and all the immigration stuff and all that, but that, you know, those are kind of the scenarios that are brought to me where they're not able to provide me with actual factual, you know, instances of things occurring. So, yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I've heard it on both sides for the immigration issue of um people who came here legally are upset that people illegally here are receiving benefits that they were, you know, there's a lot of issues there.
The thing for me is like I I don't know, I kind of support more of like a Canadian style
Mhm.
game. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but
Yeah.
in Canada, when and honestly, a little bit looser for the actual entry than even Canada, I would support, which is basically that you just got to prove that I think you should just have to prove that you're basically not a criminal. Long
Mhm.
as you can prove that you're not a criminal. And then in Canada, you have to live there and pay taxes for 10 years before you can access anything.
Yeah.
So
When
it's like if you want to come here and you in a sink or swim situation, that's Ellis Island. That's what
right.
we were talking about.
Yeah.
And I don't really I call me crazy and but if they can take my job, then take it.
Mhm.
Because you
And
don't speak English and you can outwork me, then you probably deserve the job. You know what I mean? Like
in Ellis Island though, they had to prove what they were bringing into the
that's
country.
kind of what I'm saying
Yeah,
is
they
like you
what
gotta
skills they were bringing, what how they were going to, you know, be a positive impact on our country. And we don't have, you know, we don't have that ability right now. I think that the process is broken to enter this country legally anyways. And I think there needs to be some reform with that. Like I said, you point to any area of
yeah.
our state, it's probably broken in some fashion.
Well, like I said, it's just like I've worked in landscaping, I've worked in food, so I've worked in
Right.
two areas where there's a lot of Latin immigrants
Mhm.
involved
Sure.
and will outwork most of the people that I worked with
Mhm.
was always a great day to go to work because I knew I had, this guy working with me.
Yeah.
So there's something to that where it's just like if somebody has the work ethic to
Yep.
come do what someone else won't do, then they deserve that.
And I
And
agree.
if you have an issue with that, you need to raise your kids with a work ethic because I
We're the
never had
land of
a single
opportunity.
issue competing.
Yep. Yep. We're the land of opportunity. And I think, you know, our country was built on immigration. It was built on people coming into this country. But we do need to make sure that, you know, not only are we having positive impact with the people that are immigrating, but that we're not making it so difficult to get through the process that illegal immigration is more attractive. And I think
That's
that
kind
that's
of that's kind of what I'm getting at too. And
yeah,
it's like, because I want to make it so easy for someone to come with legitimate reasons that
right,
basically we can assume that anyone that comes illegally is doing something nefarious
right,
because they're intentionally ducking the radar and
yeah,
there's no reason to do so.
right. And that's why I say there needs to be some reform with that. So for sure. And
So,
I mean, just like I said, we could be here all night talking about what's
but
broken.
I'm a bleeding heart, but at the same time, I'm also, like I said, I'm also like, I try to be realistic because I don't think that we should import criminals. We have plenty.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like
But
I
we need
said,
good people here as well. And you're
you
right.
know, I think those people also push Americans. That's kind of my point. It's like
Yeah.
if you're like seeing that, then you're like, oh man, maybe I need to
Yeah.
step this up.
One of the arguments is immigrants come in and take our jobs. And I disagree with that. Um
And I can prove it's wrong.
and there may be some isolated instances where that occurs, but um if somebody's willing to work harder than you, then yeah, you need to step up your game. I have never been somebody who I'm probably one of the hardest working people you'll ever meet in your life. And I expect everyone around me to work as hard as I am if they want to stay in my circle. That's just the way it goes. And if you're not, you're probably not keeping up with me anyways. I'm going to leave you in the dust and I'm going to find somebody else to run with because I have things to accomplish and I have work to do and I cannot be slowed down by someone who is unwilling to work as hard as I am. And so, that's kind of the way that I look at life in general. So, somebody's willing to come and work really hard and better their lives, better their families. I don't have a problem with that. I just have a problem with what we've allowed over the past, 4 to something years, of not reining in the illegal immigration that's been going on and then giving them our taxpayer
Well,
dollars.
this is something that I like to tell people for the "they took our jobs" argument. Are there more jobs here? You can answer this question. Do you think there are more jobs, more people working in New York City or Wichita?
Hmm. Um, that's a good question. I have no idea. I have no
It's
idea.
definitely New York City.
Yeah.
Working?
Well,
No, I'm
working.
not talking about the unemployment rate. I'm asking how many jobs there are.
Well,
You see what I'm
a
saying? And what
number,
is the
yeah, a number
reason
of
for
people living
that?
there.
The
Yeah.
obvious
Yeah.
reason is the amount of people that are
Right.
there.
Right.
If
Yeah.
you have a McDonald's and it services 50 people in the area, then it needs less employees than a
Right.
McDonald's that
A-
services 1,000
Absolutely.
people in an
Yeah.
area.
Yeah.
So the fact that someone comes somewhere in and of itself creates jobs.
Right.
So it's like immigration itself creates jobs
Yeah.
for those people to take.
And I'm
Does that make any sense?
yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And I'm all good for that. I think where the sore spot is for people today is the legal the illegal immigration and what we have
Yeah.
done with our tax dollars to support that. And I don't think there's anyone that is in support of what is I mean, I don't know. Maybe there are people, but
Yeah, like when
I
you
I don't know.
invite a bunch of people here and then you give them a bunch of money to be here,
And
that's
our
not
own
that
citizens are
is actually
suffering.
destroying jobs and
Yeah.
wasting money that, people people have. It's like I'm a bleeding heart. I love giving money to a lot of
Yep.
these different
Yep.
causes and people that need help,
I love
but
people in
like
general,
I
so
don't think
yeah.
people should be forced to.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no. I love people in general and I give people jobs that are, somewhat otherwise unemployable, whether they be ex-drug addicts or uh felons, former felons. I because anybody that wants to come in and work hard and they need that chance or that opportunity where they already, they've made a mistake, they've messed up and they feel they're already pretty knocked down pretty low to be able to give that opportunity to somebody to give them a hand up, not a handout, but a hand up to improve themselves in their life. I am for that all day long. And I think we need to be a country of that. Um, because heaven forbid I ever make a mistake or I lose everything. And I would hope that somebody would come along and give me that opportunity. Um, because I am a hard worker,
Well,
because I
let's
will
let's
do.
let's go back to our mutual
Yeah.
belief here,
Yeah.
and what is the point of repentance? Like, what
Yeah.
is the point of the prodigal son?
Absolutely.
If there is no incentive to do better in the future, people tend to fall back into their old
Right.
ways.
Absolutely.
So, like, the whole point of repentance and forgiveness is that there is actually a benefit
Right.
to saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to stop doing these bad things and I'm going to
Right.
start doing good things."
Because there's a
And
better
I've
option.
said that
Yep.
hugely.
Yep.
That is a big deal of mine is what we do with
Mm.
prison felons in general, because I really think that like you really create this situation. I don't know exactly 100% what the solution is, but it's like if I come out of prison with a felony for robbing somebody and I'm just completely changed my ways. I found God. I'm not going to do that anymore. But it's like if I go and apply at a Burger King, they won't hire me.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Well,
So
and I used to
what
be
what does that leave them for going, okay, well, I guess I got to
yeah,
sell drugs. I guess I
right,
got to rob somebody. I got to no one's going to hire me to do something legal, so I have to do something illegal. Especially, and I've heard this specifically from people on probation coming out of it, telling me about how they had to sell drugs because they couldn't get a job so they could pay their books to keep from going back to jail.
right.
They
That's
literally had to sell drugs to keep from going back to jail.
yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that should not be
You
happening.
know what I'm saying? Because they literally could not get a job. I
Right.
watched them apply at like 11 different places. And
You know,
the guy wants his money or you don't pay me my money for the, what do you call it, the probate stuff.
right,
If you don't pay me my money, you're going back to prison.
right, right.
And they don't
Yeah,
really care if you have a job. It's like
and
it's almost like they know what they're doing.
oh yeah, yeah. Well, and I used to be a landlord, and I would run into the same issue where people would apply, and some people wouldn't even apply at all if they heard there was like an application fee and a process. We were going to do a background check. And I told people up front, I started to because I got tired of people saying, "Oh, I'm not going to apply." And I'd have the conversation and I'd say, "Look, I'm going to pull a background check on you. And as long as you've told me what I'm going to find on that background check, we're okay. Just don't lie to me. Because if you tell me everything's cool and I pull your background check and I find out you've got all these felonies and all these things, and you didn't tell me that I was going to find these, we don't get to go forward anymore. And it's not because you have these felonies, it's because you lied to me. And we don't get to go forward. And so then, I created that situation where, I would tell people just, and they come in and they'd say, "Well, I got evicted once." And I go, "Okay." And they were like, "But it was for this." And I go, "Okay, well, I was a single mom. I was this, I was that." And I said, "That's fine. It's been 5 years ago since that. Like, we're okay. I'll rent to you." And I think that again is that hand up, not, a situation where somebody messed up somewhere and they need a path back. How could I not give them that path back? But, we can't start off with you lying to me. We can't, we're not going to have a good relationship. And I can't trust that you're going to pay me your rent payment every month if you can't even tell me what I'm going to pull on your report that I'm going to find.
Right.
So, and the only time the only time I had to tell someone no, and I mean it was blatantly she was lying to me, but she was actually wanted at that moment and had given me a fake name and didn't think I'd figure it out, and our company called us and she said, "These people really think we're dumb. Like we're not going to find out." And I said, "Yeah." So, and of course we could never reach her again cuz she was on the run. So, and so that's not, those are not the scenarios I'm talking about, but the people that legitimately are trying to get their life back on track. Of course, I want to give them every opportunity to get their life back on track. And I think that is the human thing to do, the biblical thing to do, the kind thing to do. And we need to have more of
And
that.
the sensical thing to do. That's kind of
Yeah,
my point
yeah,
is like, this is why, like, while I do believe in a lot of these I usually try to make a point to be, make the logical point. I think my God makes sense. So there's a logical point to this, and that's kind of my point is that, like, unless you want your recidivism rate to be through the roof, you have to have a way out. And this is the case in politics too, where you know we've talked about, opening your doors and listening to other people and all of that. It's just like, if you want people to come to your side, there has to be a way out. And if you're screaming at them, that's not going to
right,
be the way they take. And it's the same thing with, like, Nazis like, I mean, actual Nazis
right,
here, and
right,
like Klan members. If you listen to like a gentleman named Daryl Davis, huge personal hero of mine, He's converted hundreds of people out of the Klan. He's the most
Wow.
effective civil rights leader on the planet, and almost nobody knows who he is.
Yeah, I know.
And it's crazy. And but like that's what he does. He goes and he sits down with Klan members and has a ding conversation and talks it out with them. Whenever they call him all these names, he doesn't freak out. He just sits there and he just calmly listens, and then he makes his case.
Mhm.
And it is insane how easy it is if all you do to just put a hand out. Because
Right,
especially with a lot of these folks, the reason that they're in these groups is because that's really their only choice now.
right. Yeah,
They're in so deep that there is no way out.
yeah,
And when you tell them there is this way out, here's this hand, they go grabbing at it as hard as they can.
yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
and I
Well, and
just
and some of that comes from, how I think like this comes from my personal background. I actually had somebody approach me and say, "Well, you don't know what it means to be, you don't know what it's like to be poor." And they were talking about people on the south side of our town, and it's a lower economic status and all that stuff, and this person was yelling at me, but that's fine. And I looked at him and I said, "I was born on the south side of town." um so
Mm.
yeah, I actually do know what it means to be poor. And I said, and I was also a single parent, and there were weeks that I paid all my bills and had $5 to eat and put gas in my car. So you can't tell me that when you just want to yell at me about something and assume that I don't have an experience in it. Somebody also today yelled at me and told me that I have, and called me names on my social media. And I told him, I said, we're not going to engage anymore if every comment you're calling me a name and telling me to sit down and all that kind of stuff. And he says, well, you don't know anything about special education. You have no experience in that at all. I said,
A
well,
little
I
bit.
happen to have 25 plus years experience in it, in fact, and very personal experience in it. And so these when people do that because they have their yelling point and they don't actually sit and talk with the person to find out what they might actually have in common, conversations stop and we can't get any resolution. We can't get anywhere like that. And so I think I think that's really, really important to realize that we're not on islands, all by
We do
ourselves.
have to live together, guys.
We do actually have more in common when we sit down and engage with each other than we have not in
We
common.
really do.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
So I
and
think that's
that's
really
that's
important.
kind of the thing that I've said too. The we'll just wrap on this one
Yeah.
piece that I always say is the culture war is an important is an important fight to have.
Hmm.
It is not. It should never be legislated on either end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
I think that if you go back and you look at the hippie movement versus the straight movement, you see the merging into what we see as the 90s baby,
Hmm.
of a mix of those two things. And I think that that culture was far superior to either one of the two cultures that
Right.
created it. And
Yeah.
I think if you keep going back through the history, you'll see that. And I think there's something to like, you know, really having this conversation and letting it happen. Let
Hmm.
this be decided as, let the culture war be decided in the
Yeah.
culture,
Well, and I
you
think I
know?
think you see pendulum swings back and forth. So, because of
Yeah,
the
and it makes
ages,
it worse when you legislate it because now
right?
things tend to be permanent.
You see, like, I based on the ages of my kids, they're all 5 years apart, and I have one that is, you know, a really hardcore millennial and very left leaning, very, has a whole different mindset. And then you look at my youngest, who, his generation, what they're reporting now is one of the most conservative generations. And they are in the same family. But I think what they see, first of all, I always tell my kids, y'all had different moms. You know, none of you had the same mother, because at 19 I was a completely different mom than when I was at 28. You know, it just different complete mindsets at that point. And so I think what we're seeing, you know, my youngest has watched his brothers and how they've interacted with the world and didn't like it. Didn't like what they were seeing. And I think that's why we're seeing that pendulum swing back the other direction, to say, hey, we went too far, guys. Like, this went too far in one direction. We need to bring it back. Now, whether it swings back, you know, too far the other direction, I don't know. You know, there's
Well, that's kind of what I'm
extremism
saying
on
is
both
the
sides. It's
problem was
not
the
okay.
level of force that was behind it, not
Yeah.
necessarily the actual ideas.
Right.
Because if you just
Right.
put these ideas out there and people are like, I like that, that's stupid. I like that, that's stupid. I like that, I like that, that's stupid. Then, you know, things, like I said, that's how actual culture progresses.
Right.
But I think there was just so much force behind it that you created this element of an extreme backlash to it,
Right. Right.
you know, and that's why I say that this is why this kind of thing should never be legislated. It should
Hmm.
never be any of that. Like, just we'll figure it out as a culture,
Right.
what we're doing as a culture.
Yeah, and
And
I think as long as you know, there's things that are not harmful to other people. You know, we have our constitutional rights and our
correct.
constitutional rights and freedoms, but we don't have the right to infringe on other people's constitutional rights and freedoms. And so, and I
Well,
think
like
that's,
that's kind of the point. The First
yep,
Amendment itself is the amendment that establishes the culture war.
right,
And if we don't realize that,
right,
then we're kind of missing something.
right.
Because and I'm not saying the First Amendment and I'm not saying freedom of speech. I'm
Yeah,
saying all of it.
right.
That's what the freedom to peaceably assemble means. It means
Hmm.
that you're allowed to form groups
Hmm.
as long as they're peaceful.
Right.
Period.
Period.
People think that it means you can protest. It's like, no, it means you can form groups so long as they're peaceful.
Hmm.
This means a political party. This
Right.
means a church. This means a corporation. This means it.
It
This
doesn't
applies
mean your
across the
group,
board.
yeah, it doesn't mean your group can go out and harm another group.
Correct.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah, we're on the same.
And that's kind of my point is like the whole point of this is to say, hey, this is not a battle that should be happening in politics.
Mhm.
This is a battle that should be happening between y'all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
We're not going to get involved into what religion is correct.
Right.
That's for you guys to debate and argue out.
Mhm.
You know, as part as the populace, we're
Mhm.
not going to decide what press is correct. That's for you guys to decide.
Mhm.
You know, we're not going to decide what ideas are you're allowed to have. That's for you guys to decide what's okay and
Right.
what's not.
Right, 'cause
And I
I
think,
mean,
you know,
and it is for the people to decide a lot of those things, and I think, you know, for, um, you know, for example, this last week, and we'll end on this, like you said, the whole thing with the Jimmy Kimmel thing, um, whether I agree with what he said or not, which I didn't agree with what he said, um, but there are that individual station, whether or not we believe that they were influenced by the government, they were this, they were that, that if you take that out, that station has the right to say exactly what it said and say, okay, we didn't like what you said, so now you're
oh
done.
yeah.
You said something that was not true, you know. And we have to remember that we have those rights and freedoms, but there's also consequences to those rights and freedoms. And so, and I think we're at a point where everybody says, it's my right, it's my freedom. I shouldn't have any consequences for that. And I think that that's not exactly where I don't think that's exactly correct. It's your right and freedom to a point until it infringes or harms another person's rights or freedoms. And so we've forgotten that, and we keep harming each other when we need to get back to realizing that we can have I don't care what you do in your home. I mean, on a biblical level I do. I you know, I hope and pray for everybody. but what you do behind closed doors is not something that I should be involved in unless it spills out and causes harm to another person. And that's, yeah, and that harm to another person can happen inside that home. There are points where you have to say you've harmed somebody else and that's got to be taken care of. But I think that in general, just simply having a particular political belief or particular religious belief or a particular, personal belief, those should not be things that are infringed on at all. So, you know,
Well, this is something that me and my buddy, if you want to check it out, we had a podcast. We were talking about that and Charlie Kirk and all of that. And for me, I think that while that is correct, there has to be a cultural decision, in my opinion. Again, we have to pressure, I think, even private companies to
right,
say no, not even if like if you fire Jimmy Kimmel because his ratings suck and you're a TV station trying to make money,
right,
sure. But no, his political opinion should be off the limits,
right,
period. It doesn't matter if you don't like what he says. It doesn't matter if you think it's abhorrent. Like this is what we just got through dealing with from the left with Disney canceling people because they
mhm,
said certain things, and well, we don't want that affiliated with our company, and private companies. It's like no, I think there has to be a American culture of, look, it's not just a government thing. Yeah, that's what we have written in law, but we have a culture in America that you can freaking disagree with somebody
yeah,
and still watch their movies or listen to
right,
their comedy or listen to their music. We have a culture in America that we separate that, and they can have their beliefs and we can have ours.
yeah,
That's our culture in America. I don't care if the guy that I just bought a cupcake from is a Muslim
right,
and I disagree with him on 900 other things. He
right,
has the best cupcakes.
right, right. No, I agree with that. I think that the issue comes into play that had like, for example, had Jimmy Kimmel said this outside of his show, um, Jimmy Kimmel said a jerky thing outside of his show. It's his right to do that. I think because he said it inside of his show. So for example, if I had an employee that worked for me and came into the office and started throwing racial slurs around and or saying completely, inaccurate things and created a toxic work environment, I don't think that that person should be there anymore. Okay? And that's my right as an employer to say I don't think that I don't want you presenting this to my customers. I don't want you in front of my customers saying these types of things. And as a business owner, I have the right to say, I'm sorry, this is not the right place for you. And I think that that's where the distinction needs to be made, is that he did it on TV in conjunction with his show.
Well, this is kind of the distinction I'm
Yeah.
kind of making here to an
Yeah.
extent, because it's like if you look at like Tucker Carlson
Yeah.
is a good example. Like they're saying, hey, this is a business decision that we're making. We're cutting him because of X, Y, and Z and the
Right.
representation. And it's like, but if you look at it, like he was their number one show.
Hmm.
There's like no like
There's
there's
something
no
else going on there.
business argument here.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? It's point blank. You just didn't like that he was saying this.
Yeah.
And
Well,
and
they have the
and,
right
and
to
to
do that.
me, like
They have the right to do
to
that.
me at a certain point, I don't know, man, like especially when you're talking about these type of corporations that have so much help and so much handout from the government and
Mhm.
so much, like at a certain point, I think that if you play this game, the if private companies do it, it's not the same. You end up with a very easy workaround for
Mhm.
government.
Mhm.
And you saw this with like the Twitter files and stuff like that, where it's like, oh, well, we can put pressure on the company, then the
Right.
company will do what we want. And now the
Right.
company did it and we didn't do it. And it's just,
I don't know
yeah,
that.
it's just such a sketchy
Yeah.
territory that I think
I think it's a
as
slippery slope.
consumers,
Yeah.
we should push back on that. Not necessarily that there needs to be a government intervention here. It's me saying that as consumers, as people, we need to have a culture of like, yeah,
Mhm.
he's a piece of shit, but you're worse because you stopped him from talking. That kind of like,
Well,
I don't
and
know.
I agree with that
Not that I'm
until
even close to a fan of Jimmy Kimmel. He's a
no,
propaganda piece for the
right. And until
assholes in
like
power.
until we get to things like, so if a company, um and I mean this would have to go through a court process and say, look, we believe that you're illegally selling children on your platform. There are people doing that. Okay, that is an illegal action that's taking place. That's a So in that case, I mean, I feel like that's a justified thing. You need to turn over your files so we can prove that in a criminal case. Um, just wanting to see what's going on in people's businesses, that's not okay with me at all. That's not.
Yeah, the Twitter file
Yeah.
thing was when they were actually pressuring, like they literally had emails from the government
Yeah.
to people in Twitter going, "Why is this person still on Twitter?"
Right. Yeah.
It's like they were
Because it's a private company and you
directly coaching who they
yeah.
wanted banned.
As long as they're not breaking a law, then yeah, they should be just fine. But but the thing with the
But like,
FCC
yeah, in
and the
those cases,
regulations on
I
that,
kind of
there's a whole
I see social media like a
yeah,
like if I'm doing this kind of stuff through the phone, AT&T isn't responsible, but
yeah,
AT&T should turn over whatever evidence they
right.
can give to help the
Absolutely.
enforcement. So it's the same
Absolutely.
kind of thing
Mhm.
in that situation. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to enforce anything for you. I'm not the government.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean? But I will hand over everything you want because people shouldn't be doing this with my platform.
Right. Right.
Does
Exactly.
that make any sense?
No, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. But not just handing over information because they say so. That's not okay. Um, because I
But
do
yeah,
think
that
that
was happening with Verizon. I want to
mhm,
say the
I
because
do think
you
that
have a Fourth
violates
Amendment
rights.
right.
Yeah.
You have a Fourth Amendment right that states that they can't search your stuff, right? So that means they can't look at your text messages
Right.
unless they have a warrant.
Right.
But they can call Verizon and give them money for your text
Yeah,
messages.
that's not okay. Yeah.
That's not no, that's not that's a violation of rights. It's just that you're just circumventing it going, "Well, I'm doing it privately."
Right. Yeah.
And like I said, I don't feel like we should allow these workarounds
Right.
for our rights.
And that's a federal thing, obviously. That's not That
Yeah, no, of
that's
course, but I'm just
definitely
saying
federal, but yeah.
in general,
In
like
general,
that's
yeah.
something that I think is a issue,
Yeah.
and that's kind of why I say when we're talking about
It's it's a
free
very
speech
fine
is
line. Yeah.
by definition
Mhm.
probably the biggest threat to democracy. If we're going to talk about actual threats,
Mhm.
it's the inability to actually have the conversation that democracies need.
Right.
So like if we're talking about the biggest threat, it's like this kind of stuff is something that I feel like if we're more radically liberal on, we're going to be better off than if we're more conservative towards
Mhm.
when it comes to freedom of speech.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I said, especially as we see how the stick was just used,
Mhm.
as we look across the pond and see what they're doing in Britain.
Mhm.
I think this is a piece of land that we should not give 1 inch
Mhm. Yeah.
freedom of speech,
Yeah.
if that makes
No,
any
no,
sense.
I agree. Well, I agree. I just when you go back to what was said that was not true, I think that that was
Mhm.
the point where they said, "You know what? I would imagine there were rules that Kimmel agreed to as well. So
Right,
there's employee standards. And so we don't know all those ins and outs of what, having an opinion versus blatant lying is actually an FCC rule. So you
right.
can't spread misinformation like that. And so I think that was a fine line where that was crossed, and it's not an easy there's not an easy answer to that, but we also don't know what Kimmel had agreed to in his contract and what he'd said. There's a lot of factors that we as the public don't aren't privy to. So, um, I think that, um, Kimmel could always, I mean, they're putting him back on the air, but he could have went somewhere else and done his show. He could have, done something else, could have taken to social media and said whatever he wanted to. But the fact that he could have said it on social media, it said it whatever he wanted to say, and they couldn't have done what they did. Well, they shouldn't have done what they did. They could have, I suppose, still, but it wouldn't have been in the same context, I guess, is what I'm saying. The fact that
I
he's
kind
in
of
it
get what you're.
on
I
his
get your
show.
point, and
Yeah.
I don't think it's unfair.
Yeah.
Like the whole idea of if you're on the job and you say something, you're kind of representing your
You
company.
are
If you're off
representing
the
your
job,
Yep. Yep. And that's
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 fair.
where I'm like, I don't really feel bad that I don't really disagree with that happening because he
But
wasn't
even
back on.
still, I would disagree with the FCC pressuring.
Yeah.
In that
Yeah,
case,
and
I feel
that's
like it would have been better to just win that battle
Mhm.
that you were already winning. Like
Right.
I said, if you go and you look at all these guys, their ratings are so low
Right.
that like
Right.
it's an inevitable. So
Yeah.
to cheat like
I don't think
Dave
I've ever
Smith is a
watched
huge
Kimmel. I don't
commentator I like.
Yeah, I don't
And
think I've ever watched.
he's like it's like when you're in the very last inning and you're 15 points up and then the ref starts cheating for you
Mhm.
and it's
Yeah.
like no stop, you're going to take away like
Mhm.
my right to brag at the end of
Right.
this
Right. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
everybody's going to be like yeah but in the last inning the ref was totally in the bag for the you know what I'm saying like you just win the fight.
Yeah.
You've already basically won, nobody's watching them and then now people are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is kind of interesting how like the like you're talking about with the pendulum, how that force really just kind of always equal and opposite
Yep.
comes back.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and yeah, I think that I think we're seeing a big pendulum swing right now, and where that's going to end up, I don't know. I think
I
we
just
have a
need people to quit pushing it
we have
and
a
making it
fun
like swing harder.
we have a very fun
let's
political
let's
climate
slow
right
it
now.
down and get
Not
to
at all.
equilibrium
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Yeah, our political climate is insane right now. It truly is. So, I just yeah,
Yeah,
it's
but I definitely appreciate you coming on
thank you so much
and
for having
chatting
me.
about it.
Yeah.
Uh, if there's one thing that you can say, you're a mother of
Mhm.
three, as you said.
Mhm.
If there's one thing you could say to all the parents out there that you think they're missing, what would you say that is?
I think that they're missing. Here's the best one. When I was raising my kids, um, I always heard this, and it was, "The days are long, but the years are short." And I said, "Man, they're long. They are so long." But being on the other side of that, with all of my kids grown, the years were short. And so I just encourage every parent to enjoy every sleepless night, every uh, you know, demand that your child has on you, every moment that you can spend with that child, all of the tough moments and all of the beautiful moments. Just hold on to those as tightly as you can because they go by so fast, so very fast.
Yeah, easily the biggest investment that's taken up more of my time than anything, more of my money than anything, more of anything than anything.
Yeah,
But I will tell you, worth every bit of it. Like
absolutely.
there is the level of return on investment
Hmm.
as an economics mind.
Yeah,
The level of return on investment is unmatched.
yeah,
There, it is
absolutely.
literally priceless.
Yeah,
So greatest thing I've ever done. It's kind of turned me into an extremist. It's why I completely, am so absorbed in how everything is going to affect the children
yeah,
because I'm at the point where like I know I'm only 33 but I'm just kind of at the point where I don't really care what world I end up with.
right.
I'm more
Gotta have
more
something for your
focused
kids and
on
grandkids.
what
That's right.
yeah, what are my kids and grandkids going to deal with?
Yeah,
What can I prepare them for and how can I prepare the world for them?
absolutely.
Like it's just on both ends of that. It's such an important thing. And like I said, I really appreciate you coming
Thank
on and
thank you
chatting.
for having me. Appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.